As well as keyframing to create animation in After Effects, you can also use expressions. And expressions are a kind of small subset of JavaScript, but don't let that put you off using them, because they're very handy and quite easy to use, at least at their most basic stage, which is what we're going to cover today. After Effects allows you to create them easily and automatically without having to script them at all, really. And in this lesson, you'll learn how to add your very first expression, and I promise it'll be painless. Expressions might seem a bit scary, but in this video you'll see how easy they are to use. They're very handy because they can do otherwise boring, repetitive tasks. Now, I have Expressions AEP open, which you can find in the grouping and linking folder. Now in this composition I have this little fish swimming around a bowl, and you'll notice it disappears as it goes around the back. Let's select those layers and see what we've done to create that. So I'm going to hit the U key, and you can see here are some keyframes. Now you'll notice as I scrub through there's a little twist going on at the back there. I'm not exactly sure what's happening there, so really I need to find out. At the moment the opacity is at 0, and I have keyframes animating the opacity so it fades as it goes around the back. Now I don't really want to remove those keyframes because it's taken me a long time to set them up. So the most basic use of an expression is just to replace a value temporarily. If I was to replace the value of 0 here, I would actually change the value of the keyframe. But if I add an expression to do it, it will leave the keyframe as it is, and I won't make any changes to the keyframing. So what I'm going to do is select the opacity value and go to Animation, Add Expression. And all we're going to do is type in a number, 100. Okay, and that is our first expression, and what that does is creates an opacity value of 100 throughout the animation. So I can very quickly see where my problem is and just go in there and get rid of that little twist there that we have. So let's just get rid of that twist. And now we've fixed the animation, we can just turn off the expression. So the expression also has a little button here which enables it. And if I click that off, you'll notice the expression isn't being used and it returns to its keyframe value. So the keyframe value is represented by yellow, the expression value is represented by red. So at its most simple, you can just type a number in here. Now, you could maybe say, okay, I want to scale the fish up. And if you had scale animation keyframes, say it was getting bigger at the front, and we'll keyframe that so it gets smaller at the back. Let's go down to about there, and then let's go up again at the beginning. Okay, we should really copy and paste that keyframe so it's identical. Now you'll notice the vector file is looking a bit ropey because we've scaled it up. So what I'm going to do is click on this button, which is called the continuous rasterization button. And what that will do is it will rasterize the vector file on every frame, maintaining a good quality. So a little extra tip for you there. Okay, so we have the animation looking exactly how we want it. If we want to scale that whole animation down, a really easy way would be to add an expression, go to Animation, Add Expression. And at the moment, it's reading the value back to itself. So it's saying, take the value from Transform Scale. So we could just at the end of that say, Transform Scale plus 10. And if we accept the expression, watch what happens to the value. It now goes to 94.7, but only on a single dimension. Now that's important because we're going to have a look at dimensions later. You'll notice that it only affected the X dimension, not the Y and the Z. So how do we fix that? Well, let's have a look at some other expressions before we come back to fixing that. And we're going to have a look at this one here. And in here, I have some keyframes for the wing for rotation and the body for position. Now, normally if I want to loop that with keyframes, I would just copy and paste them over and over again. But a much easier way is to use an expression to do it. And this is one of the expressions I use the most often. So again, select the rotation value, go to Animation, Add Expression, and this time I'm going to choose an expression from this menu. So if we look through this menu, there are lots of quick expressions we can apply. And the one I'm going to apply is loop out. So just select that and it writes an expression for me. I don't even have to write it. And if we preview that, you'll see it keeps looping that wing animation over and over again. Now, it's doing a cycle loop. If we have a look in my graph editor and select that value and select the expression graph button, which is this one, we can see what it's doing. And if I zoom in, you'll notice it's moving forward and then jumping back to the beginning again. So it creates a little bit of a jump. So instead of using a cycle loop, which is the default, I'm going to come out of my graph editor and I'm going to change the word cycle to ping pong, P-I-N-G-P-O-N-G. And that will change the value graph so that we're getting a more smooth up and down motion. So that's two types of loop you found out about using expressions, and it's as easy as selecting them, applying them, and just changing the text. Let's add another one to the body. This time I'm going to create an expression by holding down the Alt key and clicking on the stopwatch. Whoops, let's do that again. We already have an expression on there. So what I'm going to do is just double hit the E key to open up the expression and activate it. And we have a ping pong expression on there too. And you'll see now the wing moves up and down and the body moves up and down over time. Now we need to get the left wing animating as well. So how do we do that? Well, we could take the value from here. Now with keyframes you would copy and paste them, but with an expression it's much easier. So let's hold down the Alt key, click on the stopwatch, and that will create our default expression. And then we can use this thing, the pick whip, which is kind of similar to the parenting pick whip that we've already looked at. And if I go up and select my rotation value for the right wing, it will write an expression for me, and it's going to completely copy that right wing rotation that I've already spent time creating. So all I need to do is activate that expression and we have that wing animating as well. But wait a minute, it's going in the wrong direction. It's rotating by the same amount. So what we can do is just go to the end of the expression and say, okay, asterisk, which is a symbol for multiplication, multiply that value by -1, and now we have it rotating in the opposite direction. So now we have our rotating bat. Now there's a couple of other expressions. I've got one for scale there, which just scales the head up and down. And I have another one down here for scale of the body, to scale the body in and out. And now we have our little cartoon bat. And as a little extra gift for you, in 04 Castle, I've actually used a particle system to create a whole flock of bats. And you can play around with that if you want to. So there we go, there's a flock of bats. I don't know if flock is the right term for bats. It should be a belfry of bats or something like that. Anyway, very quickly, I just want to show you the wiggle expression. And the wiggle expression will wiggle something. If I just switch off this layer for a second, and let's just create a shape. So I'm going to create a star shape, just in the center here. And say I want to wiggle the position around a bit. I would bring up the position value. And instead of using the wiggler palette, I can click on the stopwatch with the Alt key held down and just type in the word wiggle. So just open parentheses or curved brackets. And first of all, the frequency is what you need to tell it. How many times per second do you want a random value? So I'm going to say 10 times per second. Separate the values by commas. And by how much do I want it to move? Well, let's say 20 pixels. Close parentheses, and I've actually written from scratch an expression which will move that star around. Now, in the second example below, if you switch that on, you'll notice I've adapted that expression a little bit using what's called a variable to wiggle a single dimension, so it's only wiggling the x-axis and not the y-axis. Now, I'm going to let you discover more about variables by learning about them in the online help and then coming back and having a look at this. Another one that I've put in for you is this variable wiggle. Now, a lot of people wanted to know from me how to control a wiggle over time. So the way that you do it is you create a null object And you can actually apply effects, which are expression controls. And they're kind of empty sliders or values. Now you'll see I've added a couple to here. You can rename them. So basically you would say effect, expression control. If I just put in an angle control, I can select it and hit return and call it, I don't know, rotation wheel or something like that. So I can create these effects that control expressions. Once I've created them, I click on the lock to lock that effect control panel so that when I select a different layer, it still remains up there. If I didn't do that, as I select layers, the effects disappear. So I select the controller, just lock it. And now what I can do is with my wiggle, instead of having a number representing the frequency and amplitude, I make variables and then link those to the controllers. And I do that by just pick whipping up to the controllers. And now I can animate these to create a variable wiggle over time. So you'll notice if I select this and hit U on the keyboard, I've created some keyframes. Okay, and it starts off at 0 and then the wiggle gradually builds over time. Again, this is just a little extra for you to come back to once you've learned a bit more about expressions from the online help. So those are probably my most useful expressions, the ones that I use the most often. And you can create some really great effects using expressions. Saves you a ton of keyframing work.